to all, my name is Padre Joseph Spence. I'm part of the Franciscan family of Mary Immaculate, founded by Mother Maria Elisabetta Patrizzi, who also founded a center of studies here in Rome in 1976 with Monsignor Giulio Ricci, the Center of Studies of the Shroud of Turin, the Roman Center of Studies of the Shroud of Turin. So we're here in the Pontificum Athenaeum Regina Apostolorum, where there's one of the various permanent expositions on the shroud done by Father Hector Guerra, who's a legionary of Christ. So let's take a look. So here we are looking at the Roman flagrum, which is of course a reconstruction. It's not the real archaeological piece. So we have two exemplaries here, two models of the ancient Roman flagrum, which were probably used to scourge Jesus. So we have on one hand the Roman flagrum with the wooden handle, so a longish sort of wooden handle with three leather cords. And at the end of each cord we have bones, sheep bones. The other Roman flagrum has two dumbbell-shaped lead balls, dumbbell-shaped balls, again with a wooden handle and three leather strings. Now, various scholars studying the scourge marks on the back of the man of the shroud, we can even see here on this replica, full-size replica of the Shroud of Turin. If you take a look here, you can see many, many scourging marks, especially on his back. They're very striking, but also on his backside and on his legs, all the way down to his feet. Some even say that you can see the slashing of the leather cords, which could wrap around his legs and slash here in the back. Again, on the front, we also have many, many scourging marks, especially visible on his chest, on his abdomen, and again on his legs. And again here, there are also some slash marks on his shins. So scholars, I'm especially thinking of Monsignor Giulio Ricci, speak of about 120 strikes. Now that needs to be interpreted because we have to remember, taking a look at the Roman flagrum, that each strike involved 3 wounds, from 1 to 2 to 3 wounds, according to how the strike was then dealt upon the man, upon Jesus. So if you multiply 120 by 3, of course you have 360. It might be 250, 300, 360. People count various marks, but more or less about 120 strikes on Jesus' back. I personally am convinced that the man of the shroud corresponds to Jesus of Nazareth, so sometimes I superimpose the two names, the man of the shroud and Jesus of Nazareth.
Ok.
Qui? Ok. Scusa, andiamo di qua. Are you ready?
Yeah.
So here we have a reconstruction of the crown of thorns. Now, when we English speakers of the Western world think of a crown, we normally think of a crown like that of Julius Caesar. So a small sort of crown, a circular crown which encircles the head. Now, in the ancient Eastern world, if you think of a pharaoh, for example, by crown they meant a helmet, which was imposed on the ruler's head. So when the evangelists speak of a crown, they automatically think of a helmet which is imposed on the head. In fact, studying the shroud, we can see the evidence of not just a circular crown, as most Christian iconography represents on Jesus, but rather a helmet imposed upon his whole head. In fact, the evangelists use the word epi and also the word peri in Greek, which means above, but also it means around, but also above or upon. So even themselves, the evangelists themselves, speak about this helmet of thorns imposed on his head. Here we have about 12 rivulets of blood, which you can see on the nape of Jesus' head. So taking a look again on the crown of thorns, most probably it was weaved then and there by the Roman soldiers who wanted to mock Jesus, which is described in all of the 4 Gospels, and Matthew especially goes into detail about that. And what they probably did was just picked up some thorns that they would use to burn in the night to make a fire to keep themselves warm. They sort of weaved them together quickly and imposed it on Jesus' head. Now Matthew says they struck him again and again with a reed scepter because they were trying to make fun of him. Hail, King of the Jews, kneeling down and pretending to pay him homage. So they gave him, a red cloak or mantle, a reed scepter, and this crown of thorns. Certain scholars, especially Monsignor Giulio Ricci, retains that the crown of thorns was taken off in that moment, or rather, Pontius Pilate speaks of the "Behold the man, ecce homo," and then it seems that they took the crown of thorns off to be able to put his vestment, Jesus' vestment, back on, and then lead him off to the way of the cross. What should we see? She was talking about here, the man in the... So we here have a beautiful sculpture of a man called Andrea Bianco, who was also blind. So he designed this this head of the Ecce Homo, behold the man, without seeing. He designed it with his hands under the guidance of Professor Emanuela Marinelli. And so as I was saying, the Pontius Pilate led him in front of the crowd and said, "Behold the man, Ecce Homo," to try to lead the crowd to pity. Pontius Pilate did not want to condemn him to death because he retained that Jesus was innocent. Now the crowd insisted, and so Pontius Pilate, we know his famous gesture, which is actually a juridical gesture at that time, washes his hands, saying, "I'm innocent of the blood of this man, do with him as you desire." Facciamo la crocifisso.
Sì, sì.
So this is the crucifix, the shroud crucifix, done by Monsignor Giulio Ricci. Giulio Ricci studied for his whole life, basically, as a priest for more than 40 years, the shroud. And after many, many years of study, he did the first model, which is very similar to this, which is still conserved in the seminary in Assisi, the diocese seminary. He was the spiritual father of the seminarians in Assisi. So he made about a dozen models. He sculpted the sculpture himself and painted it himself. This is actually the only model which was painted not only by him, but also by our founders, Maria Elisabetta Patrizzi, who painted it herself under his guidance. So he would say, paint here, paint there, and she painted it. So in the shroud crucifix, we basically can see in 3D what can be read and what can be seen on the shroud. So that includes all the scourging marks, all of the bruises that you can see. It includes, of course, the rivulets of blood coming down from the crown of thorns, the swollen forehead, the swollen cheeks, the blood and the saliva coming out of his mouth, the blood which is wetted with the hair which is wetted with blood. It includes the wound in the side with the serum and the red blood cells separated after Jesus' death. We'll talk about that later. It includes his lacerated left knee, which seems again to have been lacerated when Jesus was carrying the transversal beam of the cross toward Golgotha. It also includes the position of Jesus on the cross, especially considering his right arm. Now you can see Jesus' movements were constricted by the fact of the 3 nails, one in each wrist and one through both of his feet. Monsignor Giulio Ricci, studying the angles and the geometry, he taught geometry as well as Latin and Greek in high school. So studying the geometry of the rivulets of blood, he was able to reconstruct Jesus' movements on the cross. And Ricci speaks about 2 movements. He talks about the movement of uplifting, sollevamento in Italian, and the movement of accasciamento, which in Italian means sort of, sort of sagging down. So, according to Ricci's hypothesis, they nailed Jesus' arms into his wrists with nails, heaved him up onto the vertical beam, which is called the stipes in Latin, and then nailed in his feet. Now, sagging down, one is unable to breathe because the weight presses on the lungs, and one again is unable to breathe. So, for an instinct of survival, Jesus would lift himself up, levying upon the nails in his wrists, but there's also the median nerve, which is an extremely sensible nerve, which goes directly to the brain. And he would lift himself up into the position of uplifting and stay there as long as possible so as to be able to breathe. that also gives us the opportunity to hear Jesus' 7 last words or phrases. For example, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Questo è in bronzo. This is a beautiful sculpture done by an Italian artist, Luigi Mattei, artist and scholar of the Shroud, of course, which reconstructs Jesus in the position of when he was buried. So, of course, the shroud, according to many scholars, including myself, corresponds to the burial cloth, which is mentioned in the Gospels. All 4 of them mention the burial cloth, especially Matthew again speaks of the burial cloth as being katara, which means ritually pure. So, a cloth which was made of pure linen, not mixed with wool, so it was ritually pure according to Hebrew prescriptions, which was actually probably a sheet or a roll of sheets, or a roll of one sheet which was then cut off, which would normally be used to weave the garments of the priest and the high priest serving in the temple. So it's I think it's significant to think that Jesus was wrapped in a cloth which was destined to become the garments of a high priest, because we know that Jesus himself was the high priest. So between God and man. So we have here again all the characteristics which can be seen on the shroud. So you have the wound in the side, again the same sort of face that we can see in the photographs of the shroud, especially the negative photographs, which gives us more detail. And also, for example, the position of the knees, which are contracted. Scientists and legal doctors speak of the rigor mortis in Latin, means the rigor of death. So after a few hours, especially those who have been tortured to death, sort of almost immediately the muscles contract after death and they maintain that same position in which they died. Now you can also see a funny sort of shape or form of the right arm. According to some scholars, again, if you think of the shroud crucifix, Jesus probably died in the uplifted position. His last words were, Father, into your hands I entrust my spirit. And then it says he gave a great cry and then gave his last breath. So he probably died in the upright position and remained in the upright position, in rigor mortis. So when they took him down from the cross, they had to force his arm to assume this position, which you can see here. You can also see the wound marks in his wrists and, of course, in his feet. Something that's very striking is the fact of the face of the man, which is even better seen on the shroud itself, on the photographs of the shroud. Thinking of the, I would say, the regal nobility, the serenity, the peace, which we can be seen on the face of the man in the shroud. Thinking of all the tortures that he endured. But if we think of his last words, notwithstanding the fact he had just said, my God, why have you abandoned me?" Probably quoting a psalm. He trusts himself to God the Father. Lord, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit.
Hi, my name is Father Andrew Dalton, and I'm a priest with the Legionaries of Christ, and we are here in Rome at the Ateneo exhibit on the Shroud of Turin. It's called Who is the Man of the Shroud? Well, I'd like to take us back to that first passage in the Gospel of John, where we hear about the discovery of the empty tomb. You know the story because we always proclaim it on Easter Sunday. It's the story how Mary gets up early in the morning to go see the tomb of Jesus, to tend to the body, but as you know, she doesn't find him. He's not there. And so she goes running to tell Peter and the beloved disciple, who we suppose is John, and says, they've taken the body of our Lord. We don't know where they've laid him. And so Peter and John come racing to the tomb. And so I'm standing before a replica of tombs as they were in the 1st century in the Holy Land. And you can visit ones just like this, actually, both in the north of Israel and the south of Israel near Jerusalem. Notice that there's a stairwell down. And then you might be able to see how this circular stone could be rolled to provide access into an antechamber. And then against the far wall, you have what's called an arcosolium. You have this arch, and under that almost looks like a bed. It's like a table or a sill, and that's where you would lay the body. So knowing this reconstruction, let's revisit that scene. Peter and John come racing to the tomb. And, of course, it's John who gets there first. But he doesn't go in. I love this little detail. It says he stooped. And we can make sense of that because the reason he would stoop is that if he were standing high, he wouldn't get a good angle to see deep inside. But given these stairs, if he gets low, now he can see more deeply into the tomb. What does he see? Interestingly, the word that we find in the original is that he saw the othonia. He saw the linen cloths, or the burial cloths. This word is plural. And so, fine, he sees it, he doesn't go in, he waits for Peter. Now Peter, huffing and puffing, comes after John, and he gets to, and this time, it says, he goes in. That presupposes he went down the stairs and inside of the tomb, and now he describes with greater detail what was there. He doesn't just describe the othonia, the linen cloths, but he says there was also a sudarium. That was a head napkin or a handkerchief that is rolled up or folded up separately on the side. And like, okay, John the Evangelist, thanks for telling me these wonderful details. Where are we going with this discourse? And it seems strange that he's 3 times in 3 verses he mentions the word othonia. Here's the 3rd instance. Now John, the one who was there first, enters in after Peter, and he goes in. And we have yet another instance of the verb to see. He sees the othonia, but this time look what it says. This is the climax of the passage, I think. He saw and believed. Do you know that's the first instance of distinctively Christian faith anywhere attested in the scriptures? At least if you take Paul seriously when he says, if Christ is not raised, your faith is in vain. In other words, the resurrection is this foundation on which we build all the rest of the Christian faith. But if Christ isn't risen, it's all for nothing. And so when do they first take the first baby steps towards faith in Jesus risen from the dead? In this moment. In the moment they see, and seeing they believe. Notice that it doesn't say, despite what they saw, they believed anyway. No. In light of what they saw, because of what they saw, the way they saw it, when they saw it, they began to believe. And so, this is where I want to take the evangelist by the lapels and say, what did you see so that you believed? What is it about dirty laundry lying on the ground that requires what? Christian faith, that Jesus is risen? We can think of other ways to explain those facts. And in fact, what story did they tell? Oh, they stole the body, see? And now they're, sending around this report that Jesus is risen. But in fact, look more deeply. It's the moment they see what they see. It's the condition of the empty tomb. This is what I want to highlight now. Turn more closely to the vocabulary of John the Evangelist. In a first moment, when John sees, it's a particular verb. The verb is blepo. Interestingly, when Peter comes in after he goes inside, he sees, guess what? A new verb. It's not blepo, but theoreo. It's where we get the word theory from, theoretical theater, so many other English words. But why did he change vocabulary? And then, if that's not enough, when John goes in after and he saw and believed, it's not blepo, it's not theoreo, it's a new verb, horao. And so it seems that he's intentionally changing his vocabulary as if to say there is a progression, there is an illumination that's in steady crescendo. To see from a distance is good. To see up close and personal is better. To see with supernatural faith is better still. And so it seems to me that we move from reason to faith. There's an itinerary that moves in crescendo towards a climax, but that's not the end of the passage. The end of the passage is not even faith after reason. It goes reason, faith, encounter. That's the itinerary. If you read that whole chapter, remember it's Mary Magdalene who started the story. Well, her story continues. She's sitting outside the tomb alone as Peter and John go away, and she's weeping until a gardener comes and says, "Mary, why are you weeping?" And they've taken away the Lord's body. We don't know where he is. And that's when, of course, the gardener says, "Mary." And she turns and says, "Rabboni." And she knows it's Jesus. And for a short time anyway, they embrace. And that, I think, is an image of the Christian life. We can reason, we can wrestle with the data. Hopefully it moves into the soul, into the human heart, into an act of faith. But that faith needs to terminate, it needs to come to climax in a loving encounter, an embrace even. And that's why I think the empty tomb is so important to know historically, to make sense of the data, but also more deeply to see the spiritual message that it conveys. One, it conveys that our faith is not a fable or a fairy tale. It's based on concrete facts. And then further, it suggests that we're called to a loving embrace with Jesus who is alive. He didn't remain in the tomb, he passed through it into new life. May that be our story too. God bless you.
Good morning, my name is Emanuela Marinelli. I am an expert of the Shroud. I started my interest in the Shroud in 1977, and my field of expertise is mainly the scientific field, because I have the degree in natural science and in geology. But during the study of the Shroud, I had to study also other fields of interest, the history of art. We know that we have more or less 30 different topics on the Shroud. So it is impossible to be a Sindonologist without multidisciplinarity. The aim of this exhibition is to try to answer a question. Who is the man of the Shroud? This is the main question, because we know that the Shroud for sure wrapped the corpse, but who is the corpse? Who is the man? Is a man who was crucified, this is sure. The man remained in the cloth more or less 36-40 hours only, and left a special image of himself, not only the blood, but also his image. This is the big mystery of the Shroud. So we have the mystery of the identity of the man of the Shroud and the mystery of the origin of his image. During the years, we have a story of the Shroud. We can divide the history in two parts. We have a for sure known story of the Shroud since the Middle Ages, when it appeared in France in more or less 1350. But the ancient part of the history is fascinating, because it is not without any news. We can reconstruct part of the history of the Shroud with some spots during the first centuries. In the exhibition we found also the history of the Shroud. In this panel it is explained the possible path that the Shroud had from Jerusalem, folded, so that we could see only the face, the mandilion, and it was brought to Edessa, and from Edessa it came to Constantinople, to Istanbul. Constantinople of ancient time in the 10th century. And after it was brought to Athens, and after to France. It is a possibility of a reconstruction, but I believe in this reconstruction passing in Athens, because the wife of the first crusader who had the shroud, Geoffroy de Charny, his wife, Jeanne de Vergy, was a descendant from Othon de la Roche. Othon de la Roche was a crusader who was in Constantinople in the moment of the sack of the Fourth Crusade, and he became Lord of Athens. So this possibility of passage is very interesting. After, when the shroud arrived in France, it was given to the Savoy family, and the Savoy family brought the shroud to Turin. After the field of the shroud, we have another interesting part, that is the first photograph of the shroud. All changed for the shroud when Secondo Pia in 1898 took the first picture and discovered the negative. In this moment, the shroud became not only a relic but also a cloth to be studied by science. And between these many studies, it is fascinating the study of pollen grains. It was the first study who attracted me to the shroud, because on the shroud, Max Frey, a botanist, found 28 different pollen grains, and 38 of those pollen grains are of plants not in existence in Europe, but living in Middle East. In particular, Zygophyllum dumosum is in existence only in Jordan, in Sinai and Israel. So it is a proof of the origin of the shroud. Another proof of the origin from Middle East is the presence of aragonite, a special calcium carbonate, identical on the feet of the man of the shroud and in the caves of Jerusalem. So the origin of the shroud from Jerusalem is sure. In the other part of the exhibition, we had various reconstruction of history and discoveries, but another field very fascinating for me is the similarity of the face of the man of the shroud with the main icons. In the first time of Christianity, Jesus was not painted, only symbols, but after the freedom of Christianity given by the Emperor Constantine, it was possible to reconstruct the face of Jesus, copying the holy face of Edessa, the Mandylion. So in this field of history of art, the matching of the many points of the on the face are superimposable to the ancient icon. It was a discovery of the French researcher, philosopher and scientist Paul Vignon. So this is a proof that the shroud was in existence far before the carbon dating. This is the negative part of the history of the shroud, because carbon dating was done unfortunately on a corner of the shroud. Only a sample was taken, and this sample was divided for 3 laboratories, and the result was that the shroud was, according to this research, realized in the Middle Ages, but it is not possible because we have many proofs of the existence of the shroud far before. So how can we explain this strange result of the carbon dating? This is very famous, the carbon dating of the shroud. Still today, many believes in this test, this result against the shroud authenticity. But sometimes I have the story to explain what can happen. If I have to test my blood and I have breakfast, my glucose will result not good, not really the glucose of my blood. It is altered by the fact that I had breakfast. So the problem of carbon dating is not the test. The test is good, but the sample must be good. And the sample taken from a corner, polluted, reweaved, it was a mistake. And it was possible in 2019 the publication of an article of a statistical examination of the raw data. For more or less 30 years, the laboratories and the British Museum refused to give the raw data, the singular test of every part of the samples. But in 2016, the French researcher Tristan Casabianca obtained all the raw data, 700 pages of documentation, and we gave this documentation to a professor of statistics of University of Catania, Professor Benedetto Turrisi, who analyzed those data together with his data analyzer, his helper, Giuseppe Pernagago. The result was that in 3 centimeters, the 3 samples were the size of a stamp, 3 stamps together near 150 years of difference from one to the other. Is too much to say that it is a good test for all the shroud. So we demonstrated that this test is not good. And we published the result on Archaeometry. Archaeometry is a magazine, a scientific magazine of the Oxford University. They accepted the publication. And until today, after 4 years from the publication, nobody could go against this result. So this result, we can say, is a stone very strong in the story of the shroud, that is a new demonstration that the test of carbon dating was not good. Other scientists demonstrated that it was not good. Joe Marino and Sue Bamford, who demonstrated that this part was reweaved, and Raymond Rogers, who demonstrated that in that part it is the presence of cotton, and Garza Valdez, who demonstrated that this part is covered by fungi and bacteria and so on. But this publication of the statistical analysis of the raw data is really a strong defense of shroud authenticity, because the only obstacle against the shroud authenticity was the carbon dating. The carbon dating today is not possible to be believed anymore for this publication of scientific magazine Archaeometry. Unfortunately, the mass media didn't diffuse the news, the good news, because I don't know why, but the media, the journalists, sometimes, every day they prefer the bad news to the good news. This good news must be spread. Archaeometry is a magazine who helped us, and it was really a surprise for me that Archaeometry sent us to we 4 authors of this article a mention, a thanks for the visibility we gave to Archaeometry. They clapped the hand to us for giving visibility to the magazine, because in that year this article was one of the most downloaded articles of Archaeometry, a big satisfaction for us. So we can continue to believe in shroud authenticity, because the shroud is a scientific gospel. I used to say, my teacher of Sindonology, Monsignor Giulio Ricci, used to say that the shroud was not only the 5th gospel written by the blood of Jesus, but he added, no, it is the first gospel. written before the other Gospels directly from the body of Jesus.